It started with a ding. Every Saturday morning, I'd walk down my short gravel driveway with a mug of coffee and find it again, my mailbox, bent at an odd angle, or worse, smashed to pieces. The first time, I thought it was a freak accident. Maybe a delivery truck backed into it. The second time, I installed a sturdier post and some reflective tape. That lasted 1 week. By the third time, I was suspicious. And by the fourth, I knew something was up. My name's Darnell Wright. I'm a Navy veteran, recently retired, who bought a small home in a gated suburban neighborhood to finally enjoy some peace. But peace wasn't part of the deal when I moved into the jurisdiction of the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association. And especially not when one of its more passionate members, a woman named Marlene Vickers, took an immediate disliking to me. Marlene wasn't subtle. She once left a note on my door saying my grass was 2.7 inches too long, and I'd been lowering property value with my jungle. I trimmed it the next day just to shut her up. But the mailbox? That was war. And I had proof. One night, after the 5th time it was destroyed, I mounted a discreet trail cam in my front yard, military grade, night vision capable, weatherproof. Within 2 nights, I had the footage, Marlene, in her oversized SUV, swerving just enough to clip the box at 5:42 a.m. on her way to some God-knows-what HOA crusade. She didn't even stop. I showed the footage to the HOA board. They blinked and said, "We'll look into it." That was 2 weeks ago. No follow-up. No repairs. No fines. They knew she was on the board. That's when I decided to engineer a solution. If Marlene wanted to play games, I had the time and the tools to win. I spent 3 days designing what I now call the last mailbox. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was fortifying. First, I dug a hole 3 feet deep, filled it with 160 pounds of concrete, and embedded a solid steel pipe right down the center. On top of that pipe, I welded a reinforced steel frame with a shock-dampening base, the kind they use for tactical road barriers. Then came the cosmetic part. I wrapped it in a wooden exterior stained to look like oak, complete with a decorative metal flag. From the curb, it looked normal, maybe even quaint. But inside? It was basically a medieval battering ram waiting to bite back. Just to be sure, I added a motion-triggered camera in a birdhouse pointed straight at the street. I didn't want revenge, just justice. The trap was set. 2 mornings passed. Nothing. I started to think she'd caught on. But on the 3rd morning, just before sunrise, I was sipping coffee at the kitchen window when I saw it, Marlene's SUV creeping past like a shark. She paused. Reverse lights blinked. My heart thudded. She backed up, aligned with the mailbox, and hit the gas. Crunch. I heard metal scream. Her bumper met the immovable post with the kind of impact that sends vibrations through concrete. The entire back end of her SUV lifted slightly before bouncing down like a dropped suitcase. She floored it again. This time, her front right tire clipped the edge of the post and shredded instantly. Her vehicle spun halfway into my yard before stalling out, steam rising from under the hood. I opened the front door. She was outside now, screaming at the mailbox like it had personally insulted her. I didn't say a word. I just held up my phone and hit play, the trail cam footage of her destroying the previous mailbox. Then, with a smile, I said, "You hit it again, Marlene." But this time, it hit back. Marlene's SUV was eventually hauled away by a tow truck. She stood off to the side the entire time, red-faced, arms crossed, saying absolutely nothing to me. But the real storm came that evening, at the emergency HOA board meeting she conveniently called. I showed up early. The meeting was held in the community center, where 5 board members sat behind a folding table like a discount tribunal. Marlene, with a wrist brace and an attitude, marched in flanked by 2 of her friends who nodded at every word she muttered like backup dancers. She started strong. "Mr. Wright's mailbox is a hazard. It's an act of aggression. A violation of our aesthetic codes and a direct threat to the safety of residents. The crowd, mostly elderly folks who didn't know me, murmured. I waited. Then calmly stepped up, pulled a flash drive from my pocket, and plugged it into the projector. Let's take a look, I said, clicking through clips. Clip 1, Marlene's SUV veers onto my lawn, obliterating the previous mailbox. Clip 2, Marlene doing it again, 2 weeks later. Clip 3, slow motion of her SUV crashing into the last mailbox, sparks and plastic flying. Clip 4, her yelling at the post like it owed her money. Silence. Even the backup dancers looked away. Then I dropped the final bomb. The mailbox is fully compliant with federal USPS regulations. Mounted on a post within guidelines, made from acceptable materials, and installed legally. The steel core. Entirely hidden. You can cite aesthetic violation if you'd like, but then explain why Marlene hit 5 different boxes on my property before this one. A board member, an older guy named Craig who rarely spoke, leaned into the mic. We'll have to discuss this privately. Marlene exploded. He built a weapon. He's endangering the neighborhood. I raised an eyebrow. And yet, it's never moved. Maybe the danger isn't the mailbox. Maybe it's people swerving off the road to hit it. The room broke into quiet applause. For the first time since moving here, I saw nods, people who were tired of Marlene's crusades. The board called for a recess. And I knew, as I walked out that night, I'd finally won something bigger than the fight. I'd won my peace. A week passed. No fines. No follow-ups. Just silence, the kind I hadn't known since I moved into Sunny Pines. Then, an envelope showed up in my new, and still perfectly standing, mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in tidy, overconfident cursive. I opened it on the porch. Inside was a printed letter, clearly written by Marlene, though she'd never sign it directly. It read, "Your mailbox, while technically legal, is in poor taste and reflects a confrontational spirit that is not welcome in this community. Consider this your final warning." I smiled. She still hadn't learned. I walked into my garage and pulled out a spare mailbox flag I'd painted gold, engraved with the words, "Try me." I mounted it on the post that evening. No more letters came. And more importantly, no more dents, no more tire tracks, no more early morning surprises. The board quietly replaced Marlene a month later. Rumor was she'd resigned due to stress. The new president? Craig, the same guy who spoke up during the meeting. First thing he did. Rewrite the rules to include harsher penalties for property damage, and abuse of power. Neighbors I barely knew started waving more. One even brought over a plate of cookies and said, "We were rooting for you the whole time." Funny what a mailbox can do. Sometimes, you don't have to raise your voice. You just have to build something that doesn't back down. And make sure it's bolted to 3 feet of concrete. Weeks turned into months. Fall came, and the HOA newsletter, normally filled with dry reminders about grass length and pet leash policies, ran a cover story titled "Neighborly Conduct Lessons Learned." It never mentioned names, but anyone who lived on my street knew exactly who and what it was about. The mailbox? It became something of a legend. People walking their dogs would slow down and stare at it like it was a landmark. One teenager even posted a TikTok calling it the tank box, and it got over 100,000 views. Someone else made a meme of Marlene's SUV bouncing off it with the caption, "HOA enforcement, denied." I never expected that kind of attention. But I wasn't looking for fame. I was looking for peace. And peace finally stayed. Every morning, I'd sip my coffee on the porch, watching delivery trucks pass by without incident. Sometimes a neighbor would wave and shout, "Still standing," and I'd grin, nod, and raise my mug. As for Marlene, she sold her house quietly in the spring. No goodbyes. Just a "for sale" sign that vanished as quickly as she did. The woman who once roamed the streets like a parking enforcement officer with a grudge had disappeared, and not a single soul missed her clipboard. I never wished her harm. But I did hope she learned something. Because that mailbox? It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. And for the first time in a long while, everyone finally understood where that line was. I didn't think much of it when a man in a city truck pulled up to my driveway one morning, clipboard in hand and a curious look on his face. "You Darnell, right?" he asked. I nodded cautiously. "I was told you built this." He pointed to the mailbox like it was some ancient relic. "Guilty." He laughed. "We've had 3 residents from different neighborhoods call in asking if the city offers a right box installation. Thought we were missing some new safety regulation." I raised an eyebrow. "They're asking you to install these?" "Yup. Said they want something HOA proof." He chuckled again. "One guy said it's cheaper than therapy." Word had traveled farther than I imagined. Later that month, a local newsletter did a short feature called "Mailbox Justice: One Man's Stand Against Petty Tyranny." They didn't name Marlene, but the comments section made it pretty clear everyone knew. Some people started asking if I could build replicas. I politely declined. I didn't want to go into the mailbox business. But I did host a weekend garage gathering and walked a few folks through the plans, explaining how to stay within code while building something that quietly says, "Enough." What struck me most wasn't how many people wanted the same post. It was how many just wanted someone to say, "You don't have to let them push you around." It wasn't about mail. It was about dignity. And from that moment on, the last mailbox became more than a neighborhood curiosity, it became a reminder. You don't need to fight loud. You just need to stand firm. By summer, life in Sunny Pines had shifted. The HOA meetings? Quieter. Fairer. Less about measuring fences and more about fixing sidewalks. New faces joined the board, folks who cared more about actual community than control. I stayed out of the spotlight. No interviews. No podcasts. I wasn't trying to be some suburban folk hero. I just wanted peace. But one Saturday, nearly a year to the day after the first smashed mailbox, I got a package with no return label. Just my name, sharp and neat. Inside, a custom miniature of my mailbox, metal, painted like the real thing, with a tiny gold flag. Beneath it, a folded note: "You reminded me that standing up doesn't have to mean shouting. Sometimes, strength is silent." A former adversary, no signature. But I knew who it was. I placed the miniature on the shelf in my workshop, next to my old Navy plaques. It belonged there, not because it was a trophy, but because it meant the mission was complete. That mailbox stood for something now. Not revenge. Not rebellion. Resolve. And maybe, just maybe, it helped someone else draw their own line in the gravel. By mid-autumn, something unexpected started happening. People began walking their friends and relatives past my house, not just from Sunny Pines, but from the next community over, and even a few from across town. It started with a woman pushing a stroller, pointing at my mailbox and whispering something to her friend like it was a piece of civil engineering history. Then came a man with a DSLR camera, crouching in the street to take reference shots. I asked if he was from the city. He laughed and said no, he taught high school shop class and wanted to show his students what backbone looks like in steel form. I couldn't believe it. At some point, a local artist painted a watercolor of it, the last mailbox at sunrise, and dropped it off at my porch with a thank you note. Another person left a coffee mug that read, "Stand your ground, deliver with dignity." It wasn't about the mailbox anymore. It was about the message it sent: you have a right to peace. You have a right to your space. And you have a right not to be steamrolled, no matter how many clipboards someone carries. Craig, now the HOA president, approached me during one of our monthly community events. He glanced at the mailbox and chuckled. You know, Darnell, he said, we used to measure property value in square footage. Now I think it might just be about courage per cubic inch. We both laughed. And for once, there wasn't a single complaint about grass length, curtain colors, or mailbox tilt. Just neighbors. Talking. Relaxed. The kind of place I always hoped to retire in. Just when I thought things had finally settled, trouble rolled in on 4 wheels, and a fresh coat of arrogance. A new family moved into the neighborhood. Big house on the corner, 3-car garage, custom landscaping trucked in before the moving boxes were even unpacked. The husband was polite enough. But the wife? She had that energy. I knew it the moment she called out across the street, "Is that the mailbox everyone keeps talking about?" I nodded. That's the one. She tilted her head, smirking like she'd just spotted a typo on a billboard. Looks excessive. I smiled. It works. A week later, she had a replica installed in front of her house. Same steel core. Same oak finish. Even a gold flag. I didn't mind. If anything, I was flattered, until I realized she wasn't building for protection. She was building to compete. She joined the HOA board within a month. At the next meeting, she brought up an urgent matter of neighborhood aesthetics, complaining that too many residents were abandoning the charming uniformity that made Sunny Pine special. In other words, she wanted to ban any mailbox not pre-approved by the board. Craig shot me a glance from across the table. It was happening again. After everything, someone new thought they could control the neighborhood, redefine the rules, twist the spirit of what we'd built into some petty power trip. I stood, calm as ever. If the issue, I said, is mailbox envy, I'd be happy to help you design a third version. But if the issue is who gets to control a man's driveway, then we've already had that conversation. And the mailbox answered. A few folks chuckled. She didn't. The motion didn't pass. In fact, it backfired. People rallied again, not just behind me, but behind the idea that community doesn't mean control. That boundaries matter. That dignity matters. And that sometimes, the strongest structures are built when someone tries to knock you down. Spring rolled around again, and with it came warm evenings, blooming dogwoods, and the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally at ease with itself. The newest HOA drama had fizzled out before it could take root, thanks, in part, to people who remembered how we got here in the first place. The woman who tried to ban mailboxes. She stepped down from the board after her proposal fell flat, and after residents began installing their own reinforced mailboxes. Not out of rebellion, but out of pride. What started as my personal stand had turned into something bigger. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found a letter with a return address from 2 counties over. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten, "I built mine just like yours." It's standing tall. Thanks. No signature. No explanation. Just a quiet nod, one man to another. That's when it hit me, this fight that started over splintered wood and concrete dust, it had become a symbol. Not of defiance, but of resilience. Not of revenge, but of boundaries held with quiet strength. Kids in the neighborhood had a new inside joke. They'd race their bikes and slap the side of the mailbox as they passed, yelling, "Test your courage," like it was a rite of passage. I didn't mind. It felt like the post had a soul now, welded from steel and experience. And every so often, I'd get asked the same question, "Why didn't you just move?" And I always gave the same answer. Because you don't run from nonsense. You build something that makes nonsense bounce off. I didn't go looking for a fight. I just needed my mail. But in the end, I got something better, a community that remembered how to respect each other, and a mailbox that reminded them, day after day, not to cross the line. Not with words. Not with SUVs. And definitely not with a clipboard.